Well, good morning, everyone, here on January 17th of 2022. So welcome again to How to Study and Learn About the Battle of the Little Bighorn. Again, my name is Terry Oswald, and this is the first of three parts of the video. One of the reasons, again, I've broken up my Westerners presentation that I delivered in December is that by breaking it up, and of course, sitting here in comfort in my home, I'm not taking questions. I'm just recording it, and that's not because I don't want to take questions, but it gives me an opportunity, I think, for you, those of you that may watch this, assuming anyone even watches this, or people that look at my slides or people that look at my notes, I think for your benefit, you're going to get a much better presentation than when I'm standing in front of 50 people and trying to orchestrate, the mechanics of big displays and the podium and all of these things that when you're doing a presentation. Plus, I don't have quite the constraint for time that it would have otherwise. So with that, welcome to this. Again, why am I here? I think that's an important point to start off with. I've struggled, probably like a lot of you that are watching this, I've really struggled to try to develop an understanding of this battle. And, back in 1991, the mystery started for me. I have a good friend. He's passed away. His name's Roger Flanders. He's probably about 15 years older than me, 12, 13, 14 years older than me. He was a friend, actually professional colleague. Was doing marketing research, market analysis, a lot of statistical probability things. We met when I did work for a sizable marketing PR and advertising firm in the Omaha area. And I did a bunch of computer things and so on. But Roger saw me working my butt off and he says, Oswald, I need to get you to do something other than be a workaholic. So he dragged my butt to a Westerners meeting in Omaha. And, I just got hooked. And then I began to tie that into some other hobbies that I abandoned, as I was trying to develop myself in my career in my late 20s. And I always had a love of motorcycling and had even worked in a very large Kawasaki dealership after high school for a couple, 3 years close to 3 years before I decided to do something else, study, go to college and all that, the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. But anyway, I took that. I also had a nice car at that time and, kind of a few years out of college. And I had this opportunity to go on a vacation. And so I just took off and I started driving west from actually Northwest Iowa, where I lived. I lived around Lamar's, Iowa, Orange City. You can go look that up north of Sioux City. And I went west. And so I got past the Black Hills. I think I was over towards the Devil's Tower somewhere. And I saw a big sign marking the Custer battlefield. And, I drove to that. And as I might have explained in my intro video, is that, I hit the visitor center, walked around, and then I drove up to the mass burial marker. And I saw all those markers along that ridge line, and it just made no sense to me. And again, it was as if something had grabbed me. And I kept asking, how could this have happened? I actually remember having this manifestation of feelings, probably like many of you that go, and it was like, this doesn't make sense. I remember even walking down the road and trying to imagine that if I were up on those ridge lines trying to defend myself or against attacks, how could I lose? And when I think about this today in 2022, I think I had probably the same reaction that many people in the United States back to the East in July of 1876 had with the nation's centennial. As news reached Chicago, as it reached to the East, Philadelphia and elsewhere, I think probably Americans, people in Congress, elsewhere were just like me. It's like, how could this have happened? And that's, now that I reflect on it, now that I've done lots and lots of study and have tried my best to get as good a comprehensive view, I'm like, that was a very narrow-minded response I had, because it's an indication that I didn't know what was going on, and maybe I was a little, I don't know, narrow-minded. I think I'll put it that way. There's other words we could use, but anyway, before I left that visitor center, I actually was obsessed and went back in the visitor center and I bought this book. This is my very first book on the Battle of Bighorn. It was sitting in the visitor center at the bookstore, and it's titled Keep the Last Bullet for Yourself, The True Story of Custer's Last Stand, Thomas B. Marquis, with an introduction by Joseph Medicine Crow. And basically, if you read, as I read this, after I left the battlefield and I began to make my way home by, you know, going down, I think I drove across northern Nebraska. I think it was along US 20. I was driving, you know, on those sand hills, Pine Ridge country, and on my way on back home to the north of the Sioux City area. I was reading and reading, and basically Marquis documents that, well, the mystery was solved, is that as the warriors approached company after company with George Armstrong Custer, and he had 5 companies with him, little over 200 men, plus others. 209 died with him, plus or minus 1 or 2. Some experts, you know, they argue over the exact count, but they all committed suicide. As the warriors would approach, the men went crazy. They fired the guns up in the air. They fired them in the ground. They fired them at each other. Company after company, you know, just committed suicide. That's how this happened. And I guess a lot of this is attributed to supposed, I'm going to emphasize supposed, interviews of Wooden Leg, who's a Cheyenne warrior. So I was like, okay, that makes sense. I mean, to me, based on what I knew then. Next thing I did is I found, actually, I read a couple other books. I read My Life on the Plains by George Armstrong Custer. I had actually bought, I have it sitting here, a copy of The Battle of the Little Bighorn, you can't see it, by Marie Sandoz. I read that. And I'll come back to these references a little bit as I go through the presentation, particularly the third part of the presentation. I stumbled across, I think, some other books I have sitting here around me. I have most of my library sitting here. And, you know, each one more or less, you know, either said that George Armstrong Custer was evil, or George Armstrong Custer was, you know, the victim of a grand conspiracy. I mean, something that would be tame compared to a Columbo and certainly Robert Nightingale, who I understand was quite a character around the Crow Agency area. I understand he got into arguments, legal disputes with the operator of a museum up there, things like that. But he got this book out by Far West Publishing about 1995. And I'm going to tell you, it is a page turner. I'm going to tell you the book itself. I have the cover here because the book itself is it's okay. But the Chicago Tribune, actually about 95, wrote an article, and actually there was even a belief that there should be another inquiry, and that the Army should look into this again, and that courts of, I guess, I don't know, judicial courts in the military should take another look at this, and in fact should convict Captain Benteen and Major Reno of dereliction of duty, almost a grand conspiracy. And there's talk here about falsifying a petition after the battle, nominating Major Reno as the head of it, and so on. It's a real page turner. But of course, I found later that there's, in my opinion, and not to find myself being involved in a libel or slander lawsuit, but in my opinion, I'm not sure all of what Mr. Nightingale purports here can be backed up with the historical record, but maybe Mr. Nightingale, if he gets a hand of this video, will publish a rebuttal. But bottom line is that I continued on reading a few others. I also continued on with a lot of tours, you know, and then watching of videos or specials on television. I read Son of the Morning Star. I watched that mini series. Did probably a lot of things that many of you did. I think I saw the Mitch Boyer reconstruction video about how some bones were found at the battlefield, and you know, they were able to, archaeologists or others were able, anthropologists were able to determine that maybe these bones are Mitch Boyer's, if I have that right, and so on. But that's basically, at that point, by probably 95, 96, this was settled for me. But again, all my tours, many of my vacations, I actually visited the battlefield 3 times in 91, in 96, which was the 120th anniversary, which is you can go read about that. In fact, I'll tell you what, I'll try to remember when I post all of these materials to put a link to some of the press coverage on the 120th. There was a tremendous amount of tension at the battlefield, the naming or arising after the naming of it. Also, did the Sioux and Cheyenne and Arapaho and others that died there, were they being recognized appropriately? The superintendent at that time permitted a very, very powerful march and actually the counting of coup on the obelisk. And I was there with a friend of mine. We rode our motorcycles out there, and we saw all of this, and it was quite stunning, powerful. Even I don't know. I still reflect on that moment. But bottom line is that was kind of where I ended up. But about 3 years ago, I stumbled across the Little Bighorn Associates. A friend of mine, a wife of Jeff Barnes, who's a writer, lives in the Omaha area. His wife lives in Council Bluffs, goes to our church. Andrea Barnes, she says, you should know Jeff. You and he have a lot of the same interests. And Jeff has published guides to the forts of Custer's, guides to where Custer traveled, things like that. Jeff is his work is exceptional, by the way, on a variety of other topics beyond this. But anyway, between Jeff, I found the Little Bighorn Associates, and I found what to me were initially some people I didn't think were pros that I disagreed with, like Frederick Wagner, but also a number of others who really have worked at this and had the story. And after they threw some rocks at my forehead, that compelled me to reconsider my beliefs. But moving forward into this presentation, and I'm going to keep this small for now on this deck because I'm a little concerned about Zoom and how I'm also going to work, but I'll fix this later with the second and third video because you'll want to see some of the maps I use. We have this scene, and I clipped this right out of the movie Son of the Morning Star, or the TV series from about, I think it came out when it came out, about 93. I'm sure someone will correct me when I post this. But we have this great scene where the actor portraying General Alfred Terry, he's there on the site. There, it's the 27th of June. It's 2 days after, of course, the 25th. The Terry and Gibbons column actually camped, if you can believe this, on the night of the 26th, about 4 miles north of the battlefield. They could actually see some things. And of course, General Terry had sent a scout with a party down, and I'll get to that maybe a little later. That's not really the thrust of my talk today, but basically he's there, and this is a portraying with Captain Benteen, and he says, "What happened here, Captain Benteen?" And Benteen replies in the TV miniseries, "Mistakes were made." Well, my point in sharing this with you isn't to say mistakes were made at the battle. Because again, the purpose of this talk is to open the doors, to propose a framework, to say if you really want to learn about this battle, there's a framework which I think after all of my travails might be helpful to you to try to understand how all the parts and pieces come together. But the mistakes are the thousands and thousands and thousands of books that have been written and articles and not testimonies. I'll keep away from testimonies, but all the things almost starting from the day from the day the battle ended. Not the day, but within a few days. And those are the mistakes. And so if you're a student like me, again, let's go back. I'll pick this book back up. Let's go back. I'm naive. Don't really know much about this other than, hey, it's a fun topic. I remember it. I'm in my 60s today, and I remember in the 1960s growing up, Custer, a Little Bighorn, wow, wouldn't it be cool to go out there and souvenir? That was just be something the kids of my generation were always wanting their parents to do. We can go out there and find bullets and arrowheads. But anyway, or bullets, but cartridges and other artifacts. But anyway, if this, you don't know, it's like a student beware. Beware of which book you grab first. And I will argue that there's a lot of books that'll take you down the rabbit hole. And it's only recently in the last 15, 20 years that we've reached a point where it seems to be coming together. Having said that, this is a very important slide because I'm setting a context here. If you go back to Frederick Whitaker's first book about Lieutenant Colonel Custer and his life, in going all the way, I've not read it. I have actually 2 copies. I own the University of Nebraska Press 2-part reprint, and then I have an original first edition from October of 76. The reason I haven't read it is because I'm still not sure, after all of my studies, which is probably 80, 90 books and all these other things I've done, I'm still not sure that I can read it yet what's historical and what's maybe not. So but it's an important book. But there's that book, and then for a long time we have books which are kind of apologetics. They're engaged in explaining kind of the same reaction I had in that hot day in 1991 as I got out of my car, and I said, "How could this happen? Well, somebody must be blamed. It has to be somebody's fault." But in 1983, the prairie, the park, caught on fire, and as Professor Gallagher says, and he's an award-winning Civil War historian, University of Virginia. He's retired, but few will debate me, and I'm not a Civil War expert, but I doubt many people will criticize me for quoting Professor Gallagher. He's from Colorado. He actually was, I think he taught at University of Pennsylvania, and then he spent maybe a third of his career at University of Virginia. He's a big student of Gettysburg and really the real reasons, what really happened in the Civil War, and chasing myths. But he says history is messy. You can find something such as a single letter that can cause you to completely reverse your position after holding it for more than 20 years. And of course, you can Google YouTube or you search on YouTube, finding the source, an interview with Dr. Gary Gallagher, Civil War Institute at Gettysburg College. I highly recommend us Little Bighorn Battle students watching this video. Now, he's talking about it within the context of his studies over decades about the Civil War, but I think if we watch it, you'll say, because he talks about how finding one letter, one thing has changed him. He's changed his position 180 degrees. And I'll be honest with you, up until about 3 years ago, not 2.5, maybe even a year and a half ago, I still was on the Nightingale, maybe Thomas Marquis light with Save the Last Bullet for Yourself trail, and I've got to say that 1983 burn for us, and then the explosion of writings, which came out, most notably Doug Scott's and Richard Fox Jr.'s archaeological works, and there are many others that were involved in that, and their work, and then combining that with the testimonies and the other findings of artifacts going back decades, the writings of prior superintendents and many others. Their book, which I have sitting here, I won't hold it up, Archaeology, History, and Custer's Last Battle. That's Richard Fox's, but Scott has some out, and then Scott and Fox. That is a huge watershed moment because that brought together a lot of the things that I'll cover in the battle section of this. But the reason I'm sharing this is that, again, thus far, one book and done, not for the battle. Number two, understanding all the perspectives. Also, you've got to recognize that mistakes have been made. So buyer beware if you're standing at a used bookstore, if you're looking at Amazon.com, if you're watching something on the History Channel, buyer beware. And also, history is messy. Having said that, I think I covered this in my intro. I won't cover this again in my little intro 10-minute video. So you can see where we're going to go. Having said that, this one thing I wanted to say is that this presentation, by design, I'm going to start us off and we're going to go fast. We're going to go right into it. We're going to hit the crux of it, the battle and the prelims, but then we're going to yank you out. The reason I've constructed this presentation that way is because I actually do want to shock you. I want to hit you kind of hard. I want to, like Greg Michno did with his Frontiersmen Can't Shoot Straight book. By the way, Mr. Michno has certainly rung that bell hard. He swung that pendulum real hard. Those of you that have read Greg's book there, it hit me really hard. I'm going to tell you, I was stunned, seeing stars. I didn't believe what he wrote. I was actually offended in many ways. I don't want to go quite that far, but maybe there's a little bit of Greg Michno light here. We got to bust some myths, but the best way to do is I'm going to hit you hard with how this thing went. Some of you watching this are going to say, absolutely not, Terry. No, you're wrong, but that's okay. I'm going to share with you how I came to my conclusions, but maybe you'll use this same model and go back and double check it. Maybe it'll be some benefit and you'll say, That's pretty good. Let's study it. Let's find out what this thing's really about. Prelims, of course, as I mentioned in my intro, a lot of good materials. Again, Richard Newman, he lives in California today. He's matched up, he's put together wonderful maps that are tied to the best we know with timings of where people are from the archaeological history, from Fred Wagner's works, from Lakota Noon, from Mishno, I'm sure he probably, I don't know if he used Michael Donahue's work. I do want to reference that book. I've chosen not to put Michael Donahue's Rivers Run Reds here because I'm going to refer to it later on, because that book of Michael's is much more broad than just the battle, and it has a specific purpose as well that I don't want to diminish by putting it here, because I think I need to hit that one special. But these are, there's a lot of prelims here, but these are kind of my bona fides. So we'll start off. Let's be daring, turn on full show here. Hopefully this works. Oh, awesome. So this is the 1876 campaign that we're all familiar with. That started, I want to make sure I got it. Yeah, that started supposedly, and I'll come to this, supposedly with the famous secret meeting held, I believe, in December or November of 1875. And I love to use this word, the secret meeting. President Grant was twisted. He didn't want to do this. So he had to meet in secret. And there's some modern day authors today. I won't name them. I'm going to keep this nice here today, but they're selling this idea of the secret meeting. Well, this secret meeting, which took place after President Grant and his administration had tried to purchase the Black Hills several times and purchase this large swaths of this because there was a tremendous clamoring. Yankton newspaper saying, we've got to get this ground. I mean, there were close to 15,000 miners already operating in the Black Hills. The city of Deadwood was already there. Wild Bill Hickok was probably playing cards in that famous saloon that he'll be shot in August of '76. I mean, there was a flood of westward expansion, which I will cover in the Sod House Frontier View. But bottom line, in this secret, not secret meeting, Sherman's there, others are there, and basically the orders come out to send a message to the tribes that are not on the reservations, and they are to return, I believe, by January 1st, or they will be considered hostile. It's not a secret meeting, by the way, because it was covered in the newspaper the next day. How can you have a secret meeting if it's covered in the press and the next day? It has to be one of the worst kept secrets ever known to man. And if as a product of that meeting, the first thing you do is say, well, we met and here's my orders. And there's a lot of other things I'll cover in the federal view moment of this that will bring that up. I want to dwell on that because, again, go back to the books. I'm going to just keep, for this presentation, I'm going to keep using this as my whipping boy. Or actually, I'll tell you what, I'll even go, this one's even better. I'll keep grabbing this one, is that you got to be careful what you read. And actually not what you read, that you don't just read one book, okay, and one account. That's another part of this, the lesson. But bottom line, we have this campaign that is put together. And I believe Phil Sheridan, actually the orders go out, I believe Phil Sheridan, and this is not germane to my talk directly, but Phil Sheridan and generals, I believe Crook was there, I believe Terry was there. Anyway, they put together this campaign. And I think they met, I'm going to stay away from where they met because I didn't come to this presentation ready to state the city. I'll probably get it wrong. But anyway, and they said, yes, General Terry, you will take a force out of Fort Abraham Lincoln. They had hoped that he would get out of there in March or April, but there were snows, weather, other factors that kept them from leaving until May 17th. And General Terry will have 12 companies of the 7th Cavalry. He will have 2 companies of 17th Infantry, which will total about 800 in total. And they'll also have about 100 scouts. There'll be Crow and Arikara scouts. By the way, a great book to read, the Arikara narrative. A great book. It'll be on my reference list I post. It's also one that I've summarized on the Little Bighorn Associates Facebook group, and I've published it in my list. But anyway, bottom line, he will leave there. On the other hand, to the south, we'll have General Crook. He will come out of, Crook is in Omaha, but he will form a force. And this is a big, actually the Crook force that Paul Hedren does a great job of describing in his book called Rosebud. Paul Hedren from Omaha, Nebraska. And Paul saw my presentation and he either enjoyed it or suffered it. I do not have comments yet from Paul. I'm concerned about my review, but I think Paul will give me a passing grade. He'll have 10 companies, 3rd Cavalry, 5 companies, 2nd Cavalry, 2 companies of 4th Infantry, 3 companies of 19th. He's going to have this massive force. And there's a large number of reporters, press, anticipation. If you read Paul's book, as I've studied these other columns, I think it becomes apparent to me that the expectations were highest for General Crook's force because I don't know, just he had such public interest and so many journalists and so many things with him. There was high hopes for this giant force. In addition, we will have Colonel Gibbon, and he'll have a small 450-man force of 4 companies of 7th Cavalry and 6 of 7th. He'll also have 75 scouts, and of course, Lieutenant Bradley. And Lieutenant Bradley's writings are pervasive. It's almost like, doesn't matter whose writings you're going to read about on all of this, everybody will go to Lieutenant Bradley because his journal, his writing, I have a copy of his book. You can buy it used for like $7. It's all over abesbooks.com, elsewhere. His writings are infused in what Willard has done. I'm sure they're infused in what Fred Wagner's done. They're infused in what Gray has done with his Centennial book. They're infused everywhere. They're infused in Charles Robinson's A Good Year to Die in 1876. You won't find a writing. You won't even have to read Lieutenant Bradley's book because writings about this, because you're going to probably read them and all these others, but I encourage you to read his book. Well, anyway, he's here and he's going to document this as well as McClernand. And of course, many of the men that are in that are going to document their experiences. But we'll have these 3, and of course, one last going to like trap, but they're probably, I think the idea is that, the idea is that by coming at these tribes, which have not gone to the reservations, we know they knew they were generally in this area. Any one of these 3 were expected to be able to handle whatever they encountered. Now, again, perspectives. It's not just about what I just wrote here. There's so much more going on. I have sitting here, I don't have the cover on it. I beat up my books. Sorry, guys. Red Cloud by Larson. I'll admit, this is a recent read of mine. It had been recommended to me for years. It is considered to be the probably the best, well, it is the best book on Red Cloud. But what this book, and as well as Paul Hedren's book, as well as James Willard's Little Bighorn Diary, Day by Day, and actually Willard has the best description I have seen so much of this, is that, so General Crook, he's going to, before he leaves on May 29th, he's going to say, I need scouts. Of course, we know General Crook, know of him. I haven't studied his campaigns against the Apache, but he was known in the Southwest for recruiting scouts that were from the tribes, that they were friendly to the military or could be persuaded to be friendly to the US government and military, to join him, to help him bring things to an end. So he's going to use the same approach in this. He's going to go to Red Cloud's agency, which is in Northwest Nebraska. And he's going to say, he's actually going to do 2 things. He's going to go there and he thinks he can go to Red Cloud's agency. And Red Cloud, by this time of 1876, is quite a diplomat, quite a well-known person. He's been to Washington, D.C. He's been to the East multiple times. He's being heralded by the Eastern press as almost a statesman, a thoughtful leader, our friend, the person that we can work with. Of course, we all know of Red Cloud by his by what he and other chiefs orchestrated in the late 1865, 66, 67, 68, and which led to the creation of this thing called the Fort Laramie Treaty. So Crook arrives with his force and he confronts Red Cloud. And he accuses Red Cloud of being behind all of the troubles that are going on out here with Sitting Bull and the Cheyenne and Crazy Horse and all of these, the warpath, the floods of warriors coming out of everything from Santee Reservation over towards Sioux City, from all over what we would call the Midwest. They're all coming out here and they're ready to fight. And he accuses Red Cloud of being behind this. Red Cloud's response, and you have to keep in mind, all of this is happening after the Powder River fight in March of 1876, which General Crook led. There was an initial campaign that Crook led where his force attacked basically in about 400 Cheyenne in camp, men, woman, child, surprise attack, ran through guns blazing, burned everything they had. The Cheyenne were able to get away for the most part. Crook's force captured all their ponies. Later, a few days later, the Cheyenne were able to get the ponies back, which was rather embarrassing to General Crook's army because they wanted to leave them without the ponies. And of course, these Cheyenne made it to Crazy Horse and other Sioux to tell about this horrendous thing that had been happened right out of the blue to them. And so General Crook is kind of on thin ice when he's walking into Red Cloud, because Red Cloud is not happy, as are many, because of the way the Army and the U.S. government has been acting. And Red Cloud looks at Crook very bluntly, and he says, the Lakotas are ready for action. They have enough warriors, guns, and ponies to meet any challenge. They're not afraid of the soldiers or their chief, and that every lodge is going to send its young men, and they all will say of the great father's dogs, let them come. To me, as I've read all the things I've read, studied the different perspectives, this is a watershed moment. This tells me that Red Cloud is in the game. It gets better. When Crook leaves somewhat very unwelcome, and there's a lot of dynamics on the Red Cloud Agency, which you can go read about. I believe one of the agents was killed. I mean, it was not a good place to be at this time. Actually, Red Cloud and his other chiefs there ordered Crook to be killed before he even makes it back to Fort Fetterman. And only by luck that General Crook has a 50 trooper escort on the road from here to Fort Fetterman over to where Red Cloud's agency is, that he is not killed. But those that went to kill him used their time productively, because it was wartime. It was throwdown time. The U.S. government is breaking treaties. The U.S. government has engaged in this horrific attack at Powder River in March. We're not friends anymore. We're just not friends anymore. Not that they were ever friends. And those warriors did kill other people that were traveling along this road. So May 16th is to me, it's a big day. But regardless, a lot of people may disagree with me on that. My point in sharing this is to make sure you understand the perspectives. And again, it's not one book and done. You've got to understand how all these things fit together. Going back to the secret meeting, another thing that influences my view on that, of course, it wasn't secret, it was covered by the press. There's lots of other things we'll get to in the federal view on that show there was all kinds of correspondence, writings, exhortations to do something. But I also kind of look at the longer term view over 10, 20, 30 years of what had been going on, which I'll hit as I go through the third video, by the way. And it's just not very ingenuous. It's not very ingenuous to say that this was some difficult decision by President Grant. I don't think it was difficult at all. Okay, so with that, we're now down to the overall campaign. Let me see. Okay, exactly. So, slide 8. Excuse me, everyone. I want to make sure. Yep, I'm on slide 8. I have my notes by the slide. Another great reason I'm doing this out of the comfort of my home is that I'll be a little less formal than if I had 50 people eyeball staring at me, and they've all had a wonderful dinner and we've all had our drinks and I'm the dinner speaker. I'll be a little more informal here from my home. Okay, let's see. Again, everything I'm looking at here relies very heavily on the references I mentioned earlier in my intro video. Again, I do want to give a great shout out to Richard for his work with these maps. This is one of the hardest things I think to understand all of this, is to just be able to see it with your eyes, who was where, when. Colonel Gibbon's column will leave Fort Ellis on March 30th. And what's most interesting, if you study this, and the reason you need to read like Into the Darkness by James Willard, you need to read Lieutenant Bradley's writings. You need to read actually Fred Wagner's book on Reno in the Valley and the Reno Scout, but particularly Into the Darkness, and also Willard's Little Bighorn Day by Day. Willard starts on like May 16th or something, May 10th, something like that. And he just tells you day by day where each of these three columns are. It's a wonderful read. You can go page by page. It's truly written in a diary form. It's marvelous. While Crook was doing this, Terry with Custer were doing this with Reno. This is what Gibbon was doing with Bradley and all of his commanders. But what's fascinating, and this will tell you the posture of 1876. Yes, we have the moment at the Red Cloud Agency. Things are hot. Crook's going back. He's like, oh my goodness, got a problem. Gibbon leaves. His force is harassed from day one. His men, his 450-man force, is fearful that they're going to be attacked and possibly wiped out. The Sioux, there's a 400 lodge camp that has upwards of 800 warriors that Lieutenant Bradley and other members of Gibbon's command, and they begin to see rather early, but they also are noticing that they're being harassed. Horses are being stolen. Traders that are often away from their column are being killed. This is not an ordinary year. If there's a hypothesis that the military had, which they did have, that tribesmen flee in the face of the army, they're not doing it here. By the way, while that's going on, you can read the writings of General Terry to his sisters and others. They are concerned from the moment they leave May 17th. They are very concerned because they leave here with understandings they may face as many as 5,000 warriors. There are expectations, the reports they have of what's flooding out of the reservations all the way to the Missouri River, if not farther, is huge numbers. They are not happy. I mean, they're concerned as well. Of course, we already have General Crook got his wake-up call, and he's lucky even to be alive after meeting Red Cloud at that. But Gibbon's force is harassed consistently by Sioux on the south side of the Yellowstone. Gibbon has a guideline sort of order where he's told to not, he's supposed to defend the north side of the Yellowstone. The fear is that the Indians will get away. So Gibbon, you're to keep them on that side so we can, all come and get them. But he does, again, locates this 400 lodge camp that moves around a lot. He does attempt to attack. I should have in my notes here when he tries to attack. I think it's in May, but he can't get his force across the Yellowstone because it's swift, tumultuous. Gibbon has horses and men drown while trying to cross. But what's most important is while he's trying to get his army across, the Sioux are on the other side of the river and they can be seen watching. That's an interesting thing. I thought the Indians ran. They're not running. My view of all the readings is that, come on over, boys. We'd like you to come on over. We'd like to have some fun. Lieutenant Bradley is concerned that Gibbon does not have enough men to take on this 800 warrior force. Bradley kind of thinks it's a 1-to-1. He says, yeah, two hot warriors for one trooper. It'll be about a 50-50 chance. Gibbon, to his credit, in some ways, because many people criticize Gibbon for being timid in that. If you read the records, that isn't what happened at all. Gibbon is kind of obsessed to getting across and striking a blow. He continues on downriver towards an ultimate rendezvous with General Terry's Dakota column from Fort Lincoln, which has Lieutenant Colonel Custer and the 12 companies of the 7th Cavalry. Keep in mind, this is the first time ever that all 12 companies of the 7th Cavalry have been together. Ever. They've never been together. Isn't that interesting? 9 of them have been together, 6 of them together, 7 together. But also large numbers of the 7th Cavalry, of those 12 companies, are on detached service. Some of them are in the South, involved in reconstruction. Some of them are just on detached service. Some of them are on leave. This is the first time this thing's ever been together. Keep in mind, our famous, hero, Brevet General, Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer, he's been tied up to the east in some political things that he got himself in trouble with General Grant, and only according to the writers, pleading, begging, possibly crying, but General Custer was able to get back, kind of still in the doghouse under General Terry, and not allowed to command this column, but he was able to command the 7th Cavalry. So Gibbon's force, is molested, scouts are killed, trappers are found killed. I covered that. Terry and Gibbon rendezvous. Gibbon reports to Terry and his command. In fact, Gibbon had sent reports to Gibbon, or to Terry beforehand. And this is important to note, because some of the writers will say that Gibbon never told Terry. First off, it doesn't even make sense. You have 450 men. Some of them have drowned. Some of them have seen their horses die. While they're doing all of this, they're scared to death, and they're seeing Sioux on the other. I cannot believe that Colonel Gibbon was able to keep those 400 men silent. It seems outrageous to me that when those 450 found the ones with General Terry, they might have said, well, aren't we good to see you? And where's the sutler that's going to sell me whiskey? And by the way, can I get paid? They, I can assure you, had to talk, but there's no doubt that Colonel Gibbon gave a full report of this. Slide 9. This causes that information, those reports, the elusive 400 Lodge camp that has been molesting Gibbon and moving around, that that Gibbon had seen, causes General Terry to order Major Reno to take 6 companies of the 7th Cavalry. And by the way, sorry to say, and I'm going to rely on James Willert here. Willert really covers, some people quarrel with Willert, but Willert really does describe that General Custer, or Lieutenant Colonel Custer, is not happy about this at all. This is not Custer's scout. As well, Reno's going to be given the 6 favorite companies. And if you read Charles Mills' biography of Captain Benteen, wonderful read. I strongly encourage you. Again, another perspective. You'll read how Mills brings out how Lieutenant Colonel Custer at Fort Lincoln would divide his companies. He never had all 12 of them, but he'd put the ones that weren't, maybe he wasn't as close to. I think that's the good word to put it. Not as close to, he'd have them down there at Fort Rice. Of course, Captain Benteen was down at Fort Rice. And then he'd keep his favorite companies, the companies he was closest to, with him up at Fort Bismarck. It's important to understand, if you read all the books, this 7th Cavalry, by design of its commanding officer, had divisions. But I'm also going to say here, I don't think anybody that's a serious student of this, and there's great serious students. I am probably at the best apprentice, journeyman, masters. I'm probably a journeyman wannabe. But basically we'll say that whatever happened on the 25th and 24th was a military operation. And as my dentist, who's a former officer in the 82nd Airborne, told me recently, he says, Terry, when the bullets start to fly, we're in the military. We are not out in vendettas. I've asked him as if I should be referencing my dentist in Omaha. Good guy. He and his dad were both in the 82nd Airborne, one in Vietnam and one 20 years later. So we put together these orders, and he says, Major Reno will make a reconnaissance of the Powder River, and the last named point, he will cross to the headwaters of Mizpah Peak, descend the creek in its junction in the Powder River. He will go to Pumpkin Creek, Tongue River, descend to the Yellowstone, where he may expect to meet the remaining companies of the 7th Cavalry with General Custer, who's really, again, not happy. He's kind of fuming. Willard describes it almost to a point of insubordination to General Terry, but regardless, he stays in command. He's not relieved by General Terry. And he does what he's supposed to do. He escorts his 6 companies to the rendezvous point. which also ultimately is where they all kind of meet, given Reno and Terry and Custer. He will be supplied for 12 days. He will also have Mitch Boyer and his 8 Indian scouts, which will be detailed by Colonel Custer to report to Major Rudy for duty. To me, this is one of this very, again, Fred Wagner's book brings us out, Into the Darkness by also by James Willard, Wagner's Reno Scout and Reno in the Valley book, and there's others as well. This is an important scout. This sets the stage for what is going to happen on the night on the 21st, and will lead us down through the battle on where we start on the 22nd with the 7th Cavalry moving south, and also Colonel Gibbon with Terry also moving south, but from a different angle perspective. Major Reno is going to take this force, and again, he has 12 days. So keep that in mind. He's got 12 days worth of gas in the can, subsistence, forage for 12 days. And of course, the purpose of this is to get a better idea of what is going on and the direction of that 400 lodge camp with 800 warriors. So Reno's going to leave. He's going to head down here, the 10th, the 11th, the 12th, the 13th, the 14th, the 15th, the 16th. Now, he's supposed to come north here. But what he does, let me make sure I have my notes, is he decides to exceed General Terry's orders because he's supposed to come north. But by this point, Reno's command with those 6 companies, they've got plenty of food. Their horses are not tired. He's thinking, how can I go back home, back to my commanding officer with nothing? He's on an intelligence mission. And he decides to exceed the orders in terms of where he's supposed to go. And here you can see they do further scouting. And what they determine is that 400 lodge camp has head down. It's going to go over to the Little Bighorn. They're going to get into this Little Bighorn area over here. They're actually here, Sioux and allies and Seymour. They're going to get there. Now, he's not going to go so far as to be discovered, but he is going to go far enough so that when he goes back for this famous rendezvous, he's going to send a written report, and I think Gibbon is going to receive it, and then he's going to get here, and then of course the far west, which is carrying General Terry, and then Lieutenant Colonel Custer with the other 6 companies of cavalry are going to rush to get to this position so they can receive the report. Now, General Custer actually wants to beat Terry there because he's still upset. He doesn't like this. And I think he wants, I'll be honest, now I'm playing mind reading, but some people say that Willard suggests that maybe he wanted to get there first to be more involved. I'll leave it at that. So with that, they all get together, they discuss their plan. Of course, the general finds out that Reno has exceeded the orders by going further. He didn't exceed them in terms of time or use of forage, but in terms of going forward. And of course, General Custer makes the famous statements, well documented. Well, Major, you left the glory there. You could have had the glory for yourself. You could have been the one to defeat this big camp. You would be famous now. Of course, General Custer also accuses Reno of oh, you exposed us. They'll find out we're here. Of course, I find that disingenuous because the Sioux already knew they were there. They've been molesting Gibbon's force all the way. And of course, General Terry and Gibbon and Custer and Reno had no idea what was going to happen. Actually, what had happened on June 17th at the Battle of the Rosebud, the Crook, but they had plenty of experience up along here. I don't know, I just find it fascinating. These are the things you get, different perspectives by reading. Of course, at this point, we reached the point of the battle, and we'll jump into actually the issuing of the orders. And that's where I'll pick up in my next video. I do want to say these orders are given on June 21st. And when I start the next video and we pick it up from here, I'll have some interesting insights, again, based a lot on Willard's writings, but also others, James Willard's work, which is considered cornerstone in the study of this battle, and others of how the day of the 21st transpires, the creation of these orders and dynamics in Terry's command over whether they should approach this. With that, that's the end of my first video of 3. plus the little trailer. I hope this is insightful to you. Again, I'm trying to lay a foundation here, reference perspectives. My biggest thing I'm trying to do is convince you again, this is not a once and done. Do not say, ooh, that's a handsome book. It was covered in the Chicago Tribune, 1995, got some cool reviews and press. No, do not, God bless the people working at National Park Service. I mean, Donahue, Steve Adelson. I mean, there's so many of them. You can go out to the Park Service website on this. You can go to their Facebook group. Boy, these fellows, men and women, they are pros. I could never do what they do. But anyway, nothing against them. This book was there, and maybe I'm being unfair. Marquis, by the way, who wrote this, compiled this, wrote a lot of other books. And Thomas Marquis, his work is instrumental to all of our understanding of this because he gathered all kinds of first-person testimonies. But with that, we'll come back to the next video. We'll take a look at General Terry's orders to Custer, and then we'll get into the battle. Thank you.